Good evening, everyone. I'm Janet Bruff, Senior Development Officer at the Georgian Bay Land Trust, and welcome. This is our third season of the LandMark Speaker Series and number 2 in our lineup for this year. Today, our guest speaker is Brennan Guse, and before I turn it over to Brennan, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your commitment to conservation this past year. Sorry, a little glitch here. I just wanted to let you know how you made a difference in 2021. You helped to protect 3 new conservation properties, one in Wawatasi, Cognisheen, and Manitou, which amounts to over 6 acres, which secures habitat for species at risk and places for people like ourselves to connect with the natural world. So the total number of properties right now is 67, and we now have 4 in the pipeline. So we're very excited to be able to share that news with you this year. You supported a new research program in partnership with scientists from Western University who were in residence this past summer in Go Home Bay. And they were there to study songbird behavior. Plus we added 5 new Motus towers, providing more research and insight to how we protect species in decline. You helped steward over 7,500 acres of Georgian Bay wilderness through an incredible group of volunteers, over 1,300 actually. So I applaud everybody who might be on the call tonight who helped us last year. We couldn't have done any of this without you. And finally, you assisted the GBLT in playing a leadership role in a collaborative natural conservation plan, mapping connectivity between habitats, mapping corridors for species movement, and looking at factors for promoting climate change resilience. So our plan for 2022 is to continue our great work that we've done and build on the foundation that we've been doing for many years. And with your help and the opportunity for matching funds from the Canada Nature Fund, we are on track to reach Canada's biodiversity target of conserving 30% of Canada's lands and inland waters by 2030. So together, we can make a difference. So it is at this point that I ask you to please consider adding the Georgian Bay Land Trust on your charitable giving list this year. Your support will help to grow our important conservation work now and forever. Our next LandMark speaker event is next month, April 21st, 7 to 8 p.m., when our guest speaker will be Kyle Sherman, who will be sharing painting and the changing environment. So please make sure you sign up online so we can send you the link. It is now my great pleasure to introduce you to Brennan Guse. Brennan is the 2020 recipient of the King Family Bursary. His research is based on his Master's of Landscape Architecture thesis, which focuses on a waterfront revitalization strategy for Parry Sound's southern waterfront. Results of Brennan's research propose a landscape-based approach using a phased development strategy that will restore the site to the point that it is attractive to investment, naturalize the shoreline, and contribute to community amenity and public waterfront access. Brennan now works as a landscape architect at the National Capital Commission in Ottawa, where he's involved in urban design, trail design, and shoreline stabilization projects. He looks forward to sharing his research with you all now. So over to you, Brennan. Enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Thank you, Janet. So hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Brennan, as Janet said. So my research is on a waterfront revitalization strategy for Parry Sound's post-industrial southern waterfront. So Parry Sound has always been a special place to me ever since me and my sister were GAP Kids models. So the site chosen for my research is outlined in red and is part of the southern waterfront lands in Parry Sound. The site sits within a 5-minute drive to downtown Parry Sound and is across the Seguin River from the municipal dock. The site is approximately 29.4 hectares in size. It is also a post-industrial site that has been sitting vacant and contaminated for decades. The town of Parry Sound is currently looking to transform this site into a resort and residential hub. So as you can see on this map, I outlined the site in red. So here's some photos of the site. These were taken in December 2019. So as you can see, there's a giant concrete wall, which goes throughout the site. And it used to act as a retaining wall around many giant oil tanks, which I'll talk about later on. Here's another photo of one of the giant concrete walls. This one's blue. You can see behind it, there's some rock outcrops and some forest. Here's another photo of the site. This one is from behind one of the concrete walls. You can see that the concrete wall kind of hides the view of Georgian Bay, because right behind it would be water. You can really only see the top of the Bobby Orr Center. And yes, I did sit in this chair for fun. So here's another photo of the site. You can see this is more of a meadow grassland, and then the waterfront is a bit industrial in this area too, and fairly degraded. This photo is from one of the higher elevation points on site. You can kind of see the back of one of the concrete walls. You can also see, since this was, I believe, December, this part of the bay has frozen, but the bigger bay over here is still not frozen. And there are some ice fishing huts. So this image shows some of the shoreline conditions on the site. So you can see that it's fairly degraded and has a harder surface. And you can see in this one that the water level must have been high, but there's still lots of garbage kind of floating in this area. For example, a dock, some styrofoam, and some other garbage floating around. So that's what the site looks like currently, but this is what the site looked like in the past. So in 1856, the first sawmill opened at the mouth of the Segrin River. Shortly after, several other lumber mills opened along the waterfront. During this time, Parry Sound was cut off from the rest of southern Ontario, and the only way to get into town was by a passenger ferry. The Wabano was the main passenger ferry at the time and traveled between Parry Sound and Collingwood in the 1860s and the 1870s. The increasing industrial activity soon led to the addition of the railway between Parry Sound and Ottawa, which was established in 1897. Shortly after, in 1908, came the Canadian Pacific Railway and the Canadian National Railway. The addition of these railways made the journey from Toronto a day and a half instead of a 2.5-day journey by boat. The railways had a tremendous effect on the region and brought more industrial activities such as an iron smelter and a wood alcohol plant. White pine was one of the most desirable tree species at the time in the region. Unfortunately, the forest quickly became overcut and white pine supplies quickly became scarce at the turn of the century. And I outlined the site with this white outline here. So here's another photo of the site back in the 1890s to the 1920s. Again, it was used a lot for wood processing in the lumber mills. So the industrial downfall in the region began in the 1940s. The forests were overcut, the lakes were overfished, and the town of Parry Sound struggled to compete in an increasingly globalized economy. Many companies at the time shut down their industrial operations along the waterfront or moved to sites that offered cheap labor and land costs with easier access to highway transportation. This included Highway 69, which started to be built in 1939. This resulted in major changes that left the waterfront abandoned, contaminated, and cut off from the rest of the city. Between the 1940s and the 1980s, oil storage tanks dominated the southern waterfront lands. At its peak, there were about 23 large oil tanks along the shores of Parry Sound, and had a capacity to store over 75 million liters of oil, ready to be shipped by tanker and train to points north of Parry Sound. And I'm assuming some of you may be old enough to remember some of these oil tanks that were on the site. So here's another picture of the oil tanks. You can see that, again, the site is outlined in white, the southern waterfront lands. But you can also see that there were some oil tanks on the other side of the Segrin River as well. On September 17th, 1950, a tank holding 8 million liters burst, sending thick black oil into the surrounding environment in Georgian Bay. Remediation efforts were few at best, and at the time, officials from Imperial Oil were unsure how to launch cleanup efforts. Remnants of the spill can still be found in the landscape today. So the problem with the site. There is a lot of environmental contamination and degradation. This is often from the industrial past. There's a lack of public waterfront access, especially since it's so close to downtown Parry Sound. And although the site is now zoned as marine and resort residential, it has been unable to attract investment and has been sitting vacant for decades. So the objective of my research was to create a waterfront revitalization strategy for Parry Sound's post-industrial southern waterfront. So to do this, I created Brennan's 3-bucket process. So the first thing I did was the literature review. And this was to identify and analyze contemporary practices in waterfront revitalization and master planning. I then moved on to the comparative case study. This was to identify and analyze design responses to similar conditions in other communities. I then moved on to the Parry Sound analysis part, which was the fun part for me. I did an analysis of policies, reports, guidelines, and plans. I gained a historical understanding of the site, and I performed a site inventory and analysis. Overall, the 3 buckets combined helped me create the waterfront revitalization strategy for the town. So as I said, I started with the literature review. Again, the goal of the literature review was to identify and analyze contemporary practices in waterfront revitalization and master planning. So the first topic I looked at was landscape urbanism. Landscape urbanism describes a shift from architecture to landscape as the main driver of urban form. This shift came as a critique of contemporary urban design and architecture practices that did not understand the complexity and relations between environmental systems and social problems facing society. A move towards what things do rather than what things look like was adopted as part of this new discourse. Landscape urbanism often includes diagrams of phasing strategies, animal habitats, succession planting, hydrologic systems, as well as an examination of ecologies and cultures. I then moved on to look at intermediate landscapes. So an intermediate landscape, so the goal of an intermediate landscape is to restore the site, which is often vacant or brownfield, to the point that it's possible to develop and attract investment. In doing so, an intermediate landscape can give texture and density to a formless site in a manner that is sufficiently flexible to be incorporated into future development once a program is determined. This is important because for a large site plan to be realized, it is often necessary to wait several decades for all the land to be freed up, the industrial sites to be transformed, and for contaminants to be remediated. Intermediate landscapes are often achieved through a loose planting strategy and by creating parks and public space on the site. I then looked at interim design strategies. So an interim use is defined as a temporary activation of vacant lands without anticipated demand. Interim use strategies are often allowed for site access and create usable space while a site is undergoing or awaiting transformation. Interim uses can include parks, gardens, greenways, art installations, phytoremediation, vendors, sports facilities, and parking lots. Interim strategies have the potential to improve aesthetics and perception in rundown areas, increase the amount and diversity of green space and pedestrian routes, create new spaces for play and performance, and improve the environmental conditions of vacant and brownfield sites. And I think with the pandemic, we've been seeing a lot of interim use pop up patios for a lot of restaurants. And then the final topic I looked at for my literature review was adaptive reuse strategies. So this is making existing site features desirable again. Adaptive reuse strategies in landscape architecture are becoming increasingly popular with the abundance of vacant, post-industrial, and brownfield properties. All too often, brownfields get developed into new spaces where the site is considered a blank slate, resulting in past industrial remnants being completely demolished. This slide is of Duisburg Nord Landscape Park, which is in Western Germany. This 600-acre site was the former grounds of Thyssen Steelworks. The site's industrial ruins include towering smokestacks, cavernous ore bunkers, bermed railway tracks, engine houses, mill buildings, and gas tanks. And part of this site's adaptive reuse strategy included creating elevated catwalks, belvederes, pedestrian and biking trails, industrial art pieces, scuba diving pools, or bunkers converted into rock climbing walls as well. So what I learned from the literature review is that there has been a shift in how we think about master planning. Today, planning is more complex than ever before, and issues such as climate, ecology, management, economy, demographics, and territory must be considered in the design and planning process. In addition, challenges exist from taking huge, terribly fragmented, and contaminated spaces of land and developing them in a way that creates coherence. So let's look closer at what is defining this shift. I categorize this as the old paradigm of master planning versus the shift towards the new paradigm of master planning. So in the old way we thought about planning, the site was often considered a blank slate. It often included a single concept that got superimposed onto a site. It often prioritized the end goal in final site design. It often included flashy drawings that were purely visual. It fetishized, commodified, and aestheticized the landscape. Landscape was often viewed as a place of escape. Architecture often came before landscape, and there's less emphasis on context and ecology. So that's the old way people were thinking about master planning. However, with this shift, people are starting to think more about these topics about planning. There's more of an emphasis on program and process. It is thought that design should be continually adapted and transformed over time. It's more concerned with temporal change, transformation, flexibility, growth, adaptation, and succession. It is often phased over time and works well on large fragmented sites. It often resists homogenization of the environment and supports ecological diversification. It often recognizes local characteristics and values. It develops a relationship between environmental processes and urban forms. Landscape is often at the forefront. And of course, it includes the topics I spoke about earlier, such as landscape urbanism, intermediate landscapes, interim design strategies, and adaptive reuse strategies. So then I moved on to the similar conditions in other communities section. The criteria I used to select communities included: the project had to involve waterfront revitalization. The project had to be located on a former post-industrial brownfield site. The project had to be located within a small community, so less than 30,000 inhabitants. The project had to have sufficient and recent planning documents related to waterfront revitalization. The project has to have petroleum hydrocarbon contamination, and the project site has to be between 4 and 40 hectares. So based on these criteria, the communities I chose included Midland, Ontario, Gananoque, Ontario, Squamish, BC, and Ladysmith, British Columbia, which I have been to all of them. After reading these communities' waterfront revitalization documents, I noticed that there were 10 key themes related to waterfront revitalization, and they included implementation, economic, remediation, environmental quality, cultural and historic, access, parks and open space, pedestrian circulation and trails, vehicular circulation and parking, and buildings and infrastructure. So what I did in my thesis was then I created summary tables that show typical waterfront revitalization strategies for each community based on the 10 key themes I just talked about. Now, I don't have time to talk about all of these strategies because there is 10 themes and there's a lot of strategies, but here is just a summary of some of the highlights that kept reoccurring in these communities' waterfront revitalization documents. So for example, the process should be community driven and ensure community engagement. The town should update policy and planning documents to support revitalization efforts. It should prioritize site remediation and rehabilitate damaged ecosystems. It should prioritize site access to and along the waterfront. It should protect and enhance the local environment. It should naturalize the shoreline. It should identify potential funding options. It should protect and restore cultural and heritage resources. It should increase park and open spaces. It should optimize views of the water. It should improve connectivity between the downtown and the rest of the community. It should enhance the trail network. And it should also provide a diversity of housing types that will match community needs. So just some observations based on the literature review and the analysis of the similar communities. Parry Sound should consider both the theoretical revitalization concepts from the literature review and the more practical strategies from the comparative case studies. However, although the comparative case studies had some good points, they were often enticing with their flashy images, big budgets, and large master plans. They also often consider the site a blank slate that would be developed all at once, which often followed the old paradigm of master planning approach, which I talked about earlier. This approach would not only require a lot of upfront capital investment, it would require the site to be completely closed for years of construction. I believe Parry Sound would benefit from taking ideas in the new paradigm of master planning approach, such as by focusing on landscape features in earlier phases of the development. The site will be able to attract buildings in later phases. This allows the opportunity to set up desirable conditions to attract future investment. So then I went to the Parry Sound analysis section. So I started by looking at an analysis of policies, reports, guidelines, and plans. Some of the documents I looked at included Parry Sound's official plan, community improvement plan, trails master plan, cultural and recreational master plan, and various reports from organizations such as the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve, of course, the Georgian Bay Land Trust, and Georgian Bay Forever. And of course, I did notice a bit of contrast between some of the more environmental reports and the town's plans. The town's plans were more pro-development, and obviously the environmental reports were very pro-conservation. So here's just some key words that again came up a lot of times throughout reading these reports and plans. I don't have time again to go through all of the reports, but these are just some key points. So the site should is zoned as marine and resort residential. Therefore, it should include marinas, hotels, resorts, and restaurants. So the town of Parry Sound is actually zoned it this way, and this is why it's proposing for this site. The town also sees it as a major tourist and services center. The brownfield site should be remediated. They should protect and enhance cultural and heritage resources. It should improve waterfront access. It should connect the waterfront to downtown. There should be parks, trails, and open spaces along the shoreline. They should connect the waterfront trail to the Rose Point Trail. A lot of the documents also stated that the site sits within the UNESCO Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve. Therefore, it must protect and conserve the local environment. And environmental threats for this site include invasive species, nutrient pollution, chemical pollution, climate change, and incompatible levels and types of human use. So then I moved on to my fun part, which was the inventory. So that's where I made a lot of maps of the site to better understand it. So this first map is of the topography of the site. So the site is fairly flat towards the north. However, as you move south, the terrain gets steeper with rock outcrops and small cliffs. Elevation changes along the southern portion of the site allow for spectacular views of the harbor from higher elevations. So basically over here, the site is more flat, but you can see right here and right here, we have a high point. So in this image right here, I show buildings and roads. The majority of buildings are located on the far north and far south ends of the site. So Parry Sound Marina being to the north and Parry Sound Boatworks being towards the south. And then the main vehicular transportation corridors along the site is Great North Road, which is right here, and then Emily Street, which is right here. So then I looked at trails. So the town's trails master plan emphasizes connecting the waterfront trail to the Rose Point Trail. So as you can see, right here's the waterfront trail, which just goes a little bit onto the site. And then right here is the Rose Point Trail, which is in Seguin Township. The border between Parry Sound and Seguin is actually right at the very end or south end of the site. So it's right here. So the goal would be to connect this trail to this trail. This would be beneficial since the Rose Point Trail connects to other trail networks, such as the Park to Park Trail, several snowmobile and ATV trails, and the Seguin Trail and the Trans-Canada Trail. In addition, the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail is proposing an Eastern Georgian Bay expansion, which I think could potentially go through this site. I then looked at shoreline conditions at the site. So the area in blue is a natural shoreline. However, the area in the magenta color is an altered shoreline. So often more of a hard surface, as you can see here or here. So according to the comparative case studies in the analysis of the town's policies, reports, guidelines, and plans, revitalization efforts should try to naturalize the shoreline as much as possible. So then I looked at the surface conditions on the site. So this was done by going on various site visits and also looking at aerial imagery and other mapping resources. The area in green is canopy cover. The area in yellow is grass and meadow. The gray is impervious surface or gravel. And the blue is a wetland. This map shows the remnant wall on the site. So you can see the wall is in red. So it is right here and right here. And I have images here. And I also showed you some images earlier on in the presentation. So the walls range from approximately 0.3 to 3 meters tall, where the walls are higher in areas closer to the water. This map shows zoning of the site. So basically the entire site is zoned as marine and resort residential by the town of Parry Sound. Therefore, it is really looking to develop the site. The only area that is not is right here, which is a park zone, which is the expansion, not the expansion, it's the end of the waterfront trail. So it ends right there. This map shows property ownership on the site. So the site is fairly fragmented with several property owners. It would be unrealistic to assume that all current property owners are willing to sell or revitalize their properties at the same time. As discussed in the literature review, a phased development strategy would allow the site to evolve over time as parcels of land become available. So the first map right here shows vacant land on the site. So there's a lot of vacant land. The gray is vacant industrial. The orange is vacant commercial. And the red is vacant residential. I put number 6 and 11 here because that is still owned by Imperial Oil. They were the ones who owned some of the oil tanks. And I think acquiring this land would be very important for revitalization. And this map right here shows public versus private land. So I guess unfortunately, a lot of the site is privately owned. So I think a phasing strategy for the site could look to first revitalize public properties, then plan to acquire and revitalize vacant and private properties. So this map shows contamination on the site. The area in the teal color is where there is suspected contamination. The area in yellow is where it has already undergone a phase 2 environmental assessment and remediation. And the black circle is where the oil tanks existed between the 1940s and the 1980s. The site's past industrial uses have created the potential for soil and groundwater contamination in several locations. Assumptions were made about the type and location of contamination based on past land uses, environmental assessment reports, and other environmental documents. So now I'll go through each location and describe what kind of contamination I suspect. So at this site right here, which is currently Parry Sound Marina, I suspect petroleum hydrocarbon contamination. This is because they use a lot of oil and they do have underground oil tanks. Right here is the Shell oil site, the former Shell oil site. And it has undergone phase 2 environmental assessment and remediation. I suspect this will be one of the first sites to get remediated because it's a fairly flat site. It's remediated, it's closest to downtown Parry Sound, and it's along the trail network. Right here, here, and here is currently owned by Imperial Oil. Again, I suspect it has petroleum hydrocarbon contamination, and of course, remediation efforts will have to be undertaken before any big development would occur. Right here is a small creek that comes from a little lake right here. Less than a kilometer up the river's mouth from this river is the Georgian Bay. From Georgian Bay is the Parry Sound wastewater treatment plant and the McFarland Street McFarland Street transfer station. So basically you have this river right here, this little lake, and then you have the wastewater treatment plant and the transfer station. There is expected to be untreated raw sewage entering the river during periods of sewage discharge. This is known to happen quite frequently at the Parry Sound wastewater treatment plant as it often runs at full capacity and experiences several sewage discharges throughout the year. Therefore, I think there is potential sewage coming into this creek into Georgian Bay. At this site right here, I believe there could be sodium chloride contamination because it's the salt dock. And then right here is Parry Sound Boatworks. So again, most likely petroleum hydrocarbon contamination. So this slide shows significant views on the site. This includes expansive views of Georgian Bay, Parry Sound Harbor, and the town docks. Results from the comparative case study and the analysis of policies, reports, guidelines, and plans recommend enhancing and maintaining views along the waterfront. So here I start with the analysis and look into waterfront intervention opportunities. So what could be done along the waterfront? So at this first location, I would suggest keeping boat access at Parry Sound Marina and enhancing public boat access for the expected development at this site. Since it's Parry Sound Marina, I don't really expect it to be going anywhere anytime in the future. So I just maintain the boat access here. And as I said before, I suspect this area to have the highest level of density and development. This is because this site has been remediated. It is closest to downtown Parry Sound and it's along the trail network. So potentially having maybe a few dock spaces for the development here. At this location right here, I would suggest enhancing the wetland and potentially having a boardwalk that can help with public waterfront access. At this location, I would consider pedestrian water access. So maybe it could be a swimming opportunity. It's farther away from the boats. And I think this would be a cool opportunity at this location. Right here would be an ideal location for an educational destination with water quality and water level monitoring. I think this would be a good location for water level and quality monitoring because, as I said, it's at that river which comes from the wastewater treatment plant. And I think it would be important to know the quality of the water that's coming into Georgian Bay at this site. And when doing research, I did find it hard to find water quality specifically for this area. And then finally, at this location right here, which is along the salt docks, I would suggest naturalizing the shoreline as much as possible. So this slide shows planting opportunities. The aim is to enhance the existing vegetation, create structure on site, and set up natural succession and regenerative forestry to occur over time. So the areas in the pinky purple color, I would suggest shoreline and wetland species. The areas in yellow, I would suggest grassland and meadow species. The areas in green, forest species. And then the areas in blue could be petroleum hydrocarbon phytoremediation species. So species that take a lot of the contamination out of the ground. And then at the orange, I would suggest salt tolerant species because that is where the salt docks are. And if you want vegetation to grow there, they have to be salt tolerant. So this slide shows potential trail routing on the site. The orange shows potential site entry points. The larger pink dashed line would be a primary trail network. And then the smaller pink dashed line could be a potential secondary trail network. Trail routing factors include topography. So the primary trail network should be accessible and have a maximum of 5% slope. It should avoid the flood zone. It should connect to points of interest. It should have access to viewpoints. It should have public access along the shoreline and avoid sensitive landscapes. And it should also connect to the existing surrounding trail networks. The primary trail is recommended to be a multi-use pathway to accommodate a wide range of users from pedestrians, bikers, and snowmobiles. And the main document that informed the trail routing was the Parry Sound Trails Master Plan. So I'm just going to go through possible connections. At number one, I would suggest connecting the trails to the skate park and the waterfront trail. At number two, I would suggest connecting the trail to the water tower, or is it fire lookout tower? That's what's called. The lookout tower, which is a pretty popular tourist destination in Parry Sound. At number three, I would suggest connecting the trail to Mission Park. It's good to create corridors of green space and connect parks. At number four, I would connect the trail to Emily Street just because it is a main entrance onto the site. And then as I said earlier, I would suggest connecting number five to Seguin Township and the Rose Point Trail. So here I look at areas suitable and not suitable for buildings. So areas not suitable for buildings include steep terrain, sensitive ecosystems, areas below the 178.3 flood zone, and away from wetlands. Areas without road access or potential road access are also not considered suitable for buildings. In addition, areas with contamination should only be considered suitable for buildings once the site has been or has undergone remediation efforts. And of course, further studies and reports such as environmental, geotechnical, transportation, etc., will have to be undertaken to fully understand areas suitable and not suitable for buildings. So then looking at this map now, the locations with high suitability are not in any areas not suitable for buildings. So if we're looking at the most high suitability, this area and this area and this area, they're not in any areas not suitable for buildings. And they also do not have any contamination or have been remediated, such as this site, and this site. The areas with medium suitability, so the lighter brown, are not within any areas not suitable for buildings on this map, however, do have suspected contamination. So therefore, for these sites that are in lighter brown to be suitable for buildings, they will have to be remediated. And then I looked at potential building typologies. These are just suggestions, but they were based on a lot of the documents I read. So right here, I would suggest a destination commercial use. This is because it has great views of the waterfront in downtown Parry Sound. And I really think maybe a restaurant with a patio would be beneficial here. At this location, I would suggest Parry Sound Marina. I don't think, as I said, it's going to go anywhere. The only recommendation I have is that maybe over time, they take some of the buildings out of the flood zone and further back away from the water. At this site right here, I would call this the mixed use core. Again, this is a site that's been remediated. It's fairly flat. And I think the highest density of development should be right here. And I would recommend kind of clustering the development in this area. Here, I would suggest stacked townhouses. Again, the town has emphasized the need for a diversity of housing types. And I think this kind of medium density use will fit well on the shape of this site. Right here, it's just a suggestion, but I read a lot about how the town is looking for a pool/wellness center location. I think this location would be well suited for the site because it is fairly central in downtown Parry Sound. It's close to the waterfront. It's along the trail network, and it's also close to Seguin Township. And also it would fit well on this site. This location is where I would suggest the resort development. As noted before, the town has zoned this as marine and resort. I think this will go well here because it's close to the waterfront. And in one of the last few slides, I recommended how right here could be a potential swimming location. And this location, I suggested affordable housing. A lot of the documents I read talked about the need for affordable housing in the region. I think this would be a good location because it's a bit further back from the water, so I think the land may be cheaper to acquire. However, it does have spectacular views of the waterfront since it is sitting high up. Right here, I would suggest a biosphere monitoring station. I will talk about this more in further slides, but it's at the location near that river that has potential contamination. So here's where they could do water level quality and monitoring. And then right here again would be Parry Sound Boatworks as well. I don't think it's going to be going anywhere in the future. And just like Parry Sound Marina, maybe taking some of the buildings out of the flood zone in the future. So overall, this is kind of the proposal. So the areas in green would be green space. The areas in gray could be building space. And looking at this, then approximately 72% of the site would be green space. And I think 72% green space is really a good compromise between the pressures for conservation versus the pressures for development by the town. So as I said, I'll talk a little bit about having a biosphere monitoring station. A biosphere monitoring station could be located along the waterfront at the mouth of the stream of the wastewater treatment plant. This will allow for regular water level, chemical, and nutrient monitoring. The monitoring station could also accommodate various other tasks, such as education and outreach. And this is shown in the image with the outdoor amphitheater, which is shown right here. It could also act as a starting off point for accessing the Biosphere Reserve with all the islands off Georgian Bay. And many environmental reports that I looked at did talk about the importance of and lack of water monitoring in the region. So then I looked at potential adaptive reuse strategies for the site. In the literature, I talked about how I looked into adaptive reuse strategies, and I think this could be used on the site, specifically with the concrete wall. So by keeping the existing concrete wall and applying adaptive reuse strategies, the site can enhance sense of place and create a unique design. Adaptive reuse strategies can be permanent installations or interim uses. Such adaptive reuse strategies can include a rock climbing wall, which I think would be a lot of fun, as shown here. It could include an elevated walkway. It could include movie projections onto the wall. And it could also include combining infrastructure with the wall with buildings. So for example, this is a pool/wellness center. This could be the wall and it could be built into the design. Or right here, we have marine and resort residential development. Earlier on, I showed you a photo how when you're standing right behind this wall, you really lose the view of Georgian Bay. So potentially by having the garage on the first floor, people that would be in the units above would have a great view of Georgian Bay. So here are the results. A landscape-based approach that utilizes a phased development strategy would be well suited for the site. This is primarily because phased development strategies work well on large, fragmented, and contaminated sites. Often, many challenges exist from taking a large, fragmented, and contaminated piece of land and developing it in a way that creates coherence. A phased development strategy also allows a site to evolve over time and be adapted as required as parcels of land become available and natural succession occurs. It would be unrealistic to assume that all current property owners are willing to sell or revitalize their properties at the same time. This strategy also emphasizes the importance of creating desirable site conditions to attract future investment. This is achieved by focusing on landscape features in earlier phases of development. This includes naturalization, remediation, planting, adding parks and trails, improving public access, and interpretation opportunities. By allowing natural systems to develop in earlier phases of development, it will create structure on site and be a catalyst for future investment. As shown in the diagram, landscape features are emphasized in earlier phases of revitalization, whereas buildings come in later phases. This image shows the evolution of the site from the 1890s, when the site was primarily used as a lumber mill and for the storage and shipment of wood products, to the 1950s, when the site was in active use by Imperial Oil and experienced a massive oil spill, to today, where a large portion of the site sits vacant with suspected contamination and the shoreline is heavily degraded, to 2030, where revitalization efforts could be initiated. This would include landscape features such as trails, additional plantings, remediation, parks, open spaces, waterfront access, remediation, and interpretation opportunities. To 2040, where much of the site should have undergone some form of revitalization, and most of the buildings and infrastructure should be in place or being planned. So limitations of my research is that there was no community engagement. It was only an 8-month research thesis, so I didn't really have enough time to do that, but I guess this is kind of the start of my community engagement process. A lot of assumptions were required, for example, the levels and locations of contamination. And of course, I'm not an expert in every interdisciplinary field that I might have talked about. So I want to say thank you for everyone who came to listen. Thank you to the Georgian Bay Land Trust for giving me this platform and helping with the funding.
Thank you so much, Brennan. That was a fascinating presentation. That was fantastic. We do have time for some questions. So if anyone has a question for Brennan, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and then I will read those out. All right, we've got a question here from John saying, when do they expect to start?
Okay, well, I know in 2006 they started thinking about waterfront revitalization. I read a master plan in 2006 showing some images of their waterfront revitalization plans. I saw a community improvement plan 2006, but now it's 2022 and it seems like the site is still sitting vacant. So I guess part of my presentation is to help spread the word that maybe the town of Parry Sound should really start thinking about this again. And hopefully I get the attention of the town and people who are interested, and we can start this process soon, hopefully.
Yeah, so just to clarify that Brennan's done this research, but this isn't, the plan hasn't been adopted yet. This was his research as part of his Masters of Landscape Architecture, and it's a proposal
Yeah.
that he's putting in front of the town. Okay, so from a question here, any chance that owners will be required to clean up their properties to a minimum standard?
I don't know the exact specifics related to remediation of the properties. I know that when you change ownership of a property, that's when the remediation has to happen. The owners right now, if their property is contaminated, they don't have to remediate it, I believe, I'm pretty sure. However, when the ownership changes, that's when the remediation efforts have to be undertaken. So if the town of Parry Sound is to acquire land, then they have to remediate it. And I know that there is incentives for communities, and I think the town of Parry Sound actually has incentives to help with paying for the remediation efforts. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions here about the sewage and the stream. So how many years has Parry Sound been aware of the dumping of sewage into Georgian Bay? And is the stream currently being monitored for its impact on Georgian Bay?
Okay. Not that I'm aware of, because I looked at a lot of documents trying to find water quality in that area. I'm pretty sure the town knows. To be honest, I think sewage discharges is fairly common in many communities in Ontario. But the problem is that we have a lot of aging infrastructure, and with the town growing, they're going to have to update their wastewater treatment plant so that it can support more people. And especially if we're going to be bringing more people to the southern waterfront lands, then there's going to be more pressure on the system. So I think the town of Parry Sound knows that there's sewage discharges, and I think we have to put pressure on them potentially to try to upgrade their system so less sewage does enter Georgian Bay.
Okay, great. So yeah, a couple questions about, is the town committed? What are the next steps? And have you worked with any municipal staff from Parry Sound?
No commitments from the town. I am willing to start this process and engage with them, and hopefully it can turn into something more. When I was writing my thesis, which it was actually 2 years ago, it was in 2019 and 2020. I was working a little bit with a planner in Parry Sound, but he moved on to now Township of Seguin. But I am willing to establish new relations with some of the town people. If you know of anyone I can connect with, I'd be happy to.
Okay. Are any First Nations involved? They would have valuable input.
No, I would love to speak with the First Nations. Again, it was only an 8-month thesis, so there wasn't the time in my master's. However, now that I completed my master's degree, I think it would be very valuable to get input from the First Nations for this project. And I wrote in my limitations at the end, I acknowledge that that was a limitation of my research. And I think if the town were to do any kind of revitalizations of the southern waterfront lands, engaging with the community and the First Nations would be very important.
Okay, great. Lots of comments coming in here, just thanking you for the presentation.
Thank you.
That's all the questions we have right now. Maybe I'll just give it another minute in case anything else comes in, but yeah. Okay, here we go. Can you talk more about the specialized plants that are able to do the remediation?
Okay, so I'll just give you some general plants that are good with flood remediation. Generally, willows, dogwoods, poplars, and cottonwoods are good at remediation. However, I won't go into the specifics, so I'm not a scientist, but different contaminants different trees work well with different contaminants. In my thesis, I actually suggested some species that do well with petroleum contamination, but I don't remember those offhand. But generally, willow, dogwood, cottonwood, and poplar are often used for phytoremediation. But it really depends on the type of contamination, because there's so many different types of contamination. So it really depends on the type of contamination.
All right, great. And how does that work? Do you know how that works within the plants, that they're able to do that?
It's been 2 years since I did my thesis research, but I think there's different ways. But like the roots, something with the roots. I honestly have to look back. If that person wants, I can get back to them on that.
Okay. Yeah, so just another question about where do we go from here in terms of timing. So I think, yeah, Brennan this isn't it's not an official plan yet, but Brennan's in discussions with some of the people from Parry Sound, and then it's really, I think, up to the town of Parry Sound to decide if they want to take this from here. Is that correct, Brennan?
Yes, exactly. I kind of presented today, see if people are interested. If anyone's interested, I'm willing to talk with anyone further about my plans and suggestions and work with other people.
Okay.
I put my email at the end as well. So if anyone wants to email me.
Yeah, and we will be sending around, as I put in the chat, we'll be sending around a link to this recording. I think, Brennan, can we send a link to your thesis as well, your written thesis?
Yep.
So,
is
yeah,
it on your website?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on our website, but we can include that in the email that goes out to everyone afterwards. So if anyone wants to, I think there might be some people here from the town of Parry Sound watching tonight. If anyone is interested in reading that or getting in touch with Brennan, we'll have his contact information. Okay, could you incorporate some of the town's history into the design?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that'd be very important. I did in my thesis look into the town's history. And I think, of course, there's many options to do that. Again, one of the main ways I was looking at that was with the concrete wall, because even though it might not have been a glorious history, it was part of the history. And I think kind of keeping the concrete wall could be a great design element. But there's so many possible ways that we could incorporate the history into the design. And I think that would be important moving forward, even if it's something with interpretation as well.
Okay, we've got a comment and question here from John Meyer saying, I've done considerable work on linking up with Rose Point, and our trail location is identical, as is the location of the wellness center. The southern extension of the waterfront trail is possible, but the wellness center won't be located here despite the obvious potential. Have you talked to Seguin on the hookup with Rose Point?
I have not talked to them, but I'd be happy to talk about that further.
Okay, yeah, and John, if you have further comments, I'm sure Brennan would be happy to hear from you afterwards. Yeah, sounds like you've been involved there. Okay, well, that's all the questions we have. So thank you again, Brennan, so much. This has been really fantastic. And thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. I'm just going to hand things over to Janet for some final words.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Brennan. There's lots of great information there, and it sounds like you've stimulated a lot of conversation and next steps, so thank you very much for that. Thank you all so much for coming today, and I just want to, put in my last plug here that as we are all wonderful supporters of the Bay, we look forward to spring. We look forward to getting back to our very special places and the unique opportunities that it gives us. And our work tries to give you that unique experience. So we really do wish that you consider the Georgian Bay Land Trust in your charitable giving this year. The ice is starting to melt. The birds are starting to come back. We're all itching to get back to the Bay, so I look forward to seeing you all soon. And I'll send out the link and backup information for all of Brennan's information today. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the balance of your evening.